Welcome to the 2024 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Kansas City, Missouri. I am Travis Kurowski, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. Here is a visual description of myself. I have white skin, black hair, I'm about 6 feet tall, wearing a gray blazer. The Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I'm a member of AWP Board of Directors, but first and foremost, I'm a member of AWP. Membership with AWP provides me with the resources year-round, but also, just importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. My membership dues help writers find meaningful careers and publication opportunities and make services like writer-to-writer mentorship and the AWP HBCU Fellowship Program possible. If you aren't already, I invite you to become a member today. We are delighted to bring you this event today. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and the literary partner hosting this event, the Authors Guild. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Now, before we start, I just need to do a little housekeeping. Please silence your cell phones. Remember, there is no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. Please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing and a table out back there before approaching them to have your book signed. Lastly, we ask that you please be aware of your fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help AWP be more accessible. Specifically, if you see a barrier to accessibility, let us know by calling or texting our accessibility hotline at 240-269-6635. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question someone's use of an accommodation. Thank you. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Maya Shanbhag Lang, writer and current president of the Authors Guild, who will introduce this fantastic event.
Before I begin, are we okay on acoustics? Can you guys hear me okay? Yes, thank you for the thumbs up. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm honored to lead a conversation with these two beautiful, moving, incredible authors. I want to add that I'm proud to be part of the Authors Guild for sponsoring this event. One of my priorities as president is to give space to necessary voices that enrich this literary landscape of ours. And I hope you two don't mind. I just wanted to take a very quick moment because I would be remiss if I didn't say a quick word about the Guild, which I hope that you will each join. Why? Because we fight for authors' rights, and just so you know, we have membership categories for emerging writers and students, along with full-fledged membership for authors who have book deals. When you're a member, you get access to really helpful resources, things like how to know what to deduct from your taxes, how to navigate marketing and social media. Your agent contract and your book contracts get reviewed for free by us, by our legal team. You probably knew all that. I wanted to tell just a very quick story that I just learned. This year marks the centennial of James Baldwin. As many of you know, he was born 100 years ago. After Baldwin died in 1987, his publisher, McGraw-Hill, tried to recoup the advance that they had given him, which was an advance of $200,000. They tried to recoup that from his estate. His estate meaning his 87-year-old mother, who, upon hearing that she was supposed to cough up $200,000, panicked. She had this small apartment in Harlem, and she was distraught because she thought she was going to be thrown out onto the street and destitute. She couldn't believe that this publisher was coming after her for this money. Baldwin had died of esophageal cancer, which was why he hadn't completed this book. And Baldwin's mother remembered that he had been a member of the Guild. And so she reached out to the Guild We contacted the publisher and said, you absolutely cannot recoup your book advance. A publisher assumes pre-publication risk. And to this day, the Guild has been in touch with the Baldwin estate. Baldwin's nieces and nephews still talk about that moment of his mother's panic and then the relief of knowing that she was not going to be effectively homeless. I was deeply humbled when I learned that. It's hard for me to not get a little teary-eyed thinking of it. So when you ask, what is the Guild? What do you guys do? I say, this is who we are, this is what we do, and I hope that you will join for that reason. Okay, thank you for that. And before we delve into our conversation, the three of us wanted to begin just by acknowledging and paying tribute to a loss in the community this week with the passing of the singular and iconic Cecilia Gentili, who died on Tuesday. Gentili was a trans activist, an actress, an advocate, an organizer, a true icon. I first came across her work reading her essays in the Times, decriminalizing sex work, protecting trans rights, which is necessary now more than ever. Meredith and Kai Cheng, I know her loss has affected you both deeply, and I understand that you each wanted to say just a few words to commemorate her and to honor her work and her life. So I just wanted to give you both the chance to do that.
Cecilia's loss to me was not just a literary loss. She's a person who has a very specific meaning in my life. She was one of the first trans women that I met after I publicly came out as trans. She was actually my case manager at Aperture Health Center. And she continues to be an inspiration, not just in her work as an author. Everybody should read Faltas, her memoir, which is available from Little Puss Press, but also as an example, a true example of leading an authentic life and leading a life that is full of joy and full of activism, and she will be remembered, and her work will inspire the next generations of trans people. Thank you.
Thanks so much to both of you for your words about Cecilia. I don't have too much to add, except that the loss of a trans icon and leader in the community is deeply painful, particularly at a time like this one, where queer and trans people are experiencing increased systemic discrimination and oppression across the world. Cecilia was a leader in pushing for trans rights, but also for the liberation of marginalized peoples of many kinds. And I think I just want to take a moment to observe how deeply sad I am that she's gone, and to invite us to commit to living lives that honor her memory. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, both of you, for speaking so genuinely and sincerely about her and what she meant to you. I now wanted to pivot from her crucial, incredible work to yours. I was deeply moved by both of your books. I can't tell you how much. I will tell you that I found both of your books in different ways extraordinarily beautiful and resonant and moving. They spoke to me, and each book made me feel seen, made me feel less alone. I think those are the highest compliments one can give a work of literature. And part of what I want to highlight in particular is the multifaceted, layered aspects of these works. Meredith, your memoir, Fairest, cerebral, incisive, acutely observed, delved into your particular experience growing up albino in the Philippines, and how this frames not only your experience as a trans woman, but at Harvard as a college student, as a young gay man in a partnered relationship, as an Asian in a culture where skin color is given such weight, and as an American, constantly being looked at as people attempt to decipher you, place you, that horrible question of, what are you? These are all layers of experience that spoke to me deeply. Kai Cheng, your beautiful book, so different in its structure and form, subtitled Letters to Lost Souls, consists of an assemblage of poems and offerings and exercises that are invitations to the reader. There's a kind of pastiche effect, a kaleidoscope of moonlight and herbs and witchiness and electricity, a dreamscape. But this isn't a fuzzy dreamscape. These words cut to the bone. You have a letter to trans exclusionary feminists. You even have a letter to J.K. Rowling, which blew me away. You write, despite all that has happened, I believe we can be sisters still. What a beautiful and radical empathy. Okay, so for the conversation part of this, I'm now going to move over to our living room so that this can feel a little bit more organic, but I just wanted the audience to have a sense of each of your books in that way. Okay, so I'm going to shuffle on over here. And hopefully my mic will transfer. It did, thank you. Because the three of us are writers, I get to be a little bit selfish and geek out at the writing level. I wanted to ask you about how each of you came to structure these books, because these books are not linear, they're not chronological, they're not conventional. I was hoping you could walk us through these unorthodox accounts and share in particular if earlier drafts were structured differently. And part of why I ask this is because when I was writing my memoir, What We Carry, the original draft started at a very different point in time. And it was only when revising it and revising it and revising it that I realized how it needed to be restructured. I didn't know if there was something similar to that for you, or if you knew from the outset the shape that it would take. So I was hoping you could speak to that evolution.
Should I start?
Yes, please.
I mean, amazing question. Any opportunity to nerd out about writing is very welcome for me. And also, by the way, I found both of your books, just immensely moving, and were also just the absolute right books for me to be reading at this time. Also, we found out that we're all water signs, so 2 Cancers and a Pisces. So the chances of tears being shed on this panel are higher than usual, probably by me. But for me, I mean, there were a couple of key moments structurally for this book. First of all, I probably wrote like 5 or 6 different prologues for it, and it just didn't feel right. And I'm one of those people where the way that I work is that a little piece of the puzzle can represent the whole puzzle. And I knew that if I could start with the right prologue, with a prologue that allows me to both, the prologue ended up being set at my 20th year college reunion, which allowed me to both narrate myself in the present and also myself as a college student, which were 2 really pivotal moments in my life, especially as a college student who was a new immigrant who had moved to a new place after 3 years in the States, having consciously shed my Filipino accent for the purposes of being read in a way that I found at the time validated me, right? And after that, I was able to then give myself the playing field, right, to narrate there's this wonderful Vivian Gornick, why am I forgetting the name of this book? The Situation in the Story, writes about the way that we necessarily have to construct personas as memoir writers because the reader doesn't get all of us when they interact with us, right? And I wanted to be able to narrate from the moment that, the specific moments that I was living, the events of my life, but also from that sort of new immigrant, wide-eyed immigrant perspective and from the perspective of the present simultaneously. And I knew that writing that prologue would allow me to do all of those things. So that was one key moment. And the other key moment is that I'm very sensitive to titles. And so I actually, I feel like right before we submitted the book, I sold the book on proposal, I literally spent an entire weekend, actually it was longer, I think it was like 5 days, holed up in a hotel room trying to figure out this title, because I knew that as soon as I had the title, I would understand the structure of it. And once I had Fairest, a title that connotes both physical beauty, but one that is tied to whiteness, while also invoking justice, then I knew that I had a framework for the book.
You've already anticipated. I was totally going to ask about titles. For me, titles are so difficult. They resist me. I find them impossible. And so that's really fascinating, both the prologue and the title in terms of how they helped you conceive of and frame this story. And I will say that when I first opened it, the fact that it starts at this Harvard reunion and you coming back to Harvard, I thought, oh, that's fascinating. It's like, that's our first puzzle piece. And then as the story evolved, I thought, this makes so much sense that that's the first puzzle piece as a place that brings up different iterations of you and versions of you and ways that you've struggled with identity and found your way to peace with identity. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had the opportunity to read Fairest early on as a reviewer, and the title was one of the things that I noticed first and kept on coming back to as I was reading it. I was like, oh my God, this title is one word, but there are so many layers to the meaning, and I think this is something I really appreciate about your work, Meredith, is that there are so many interlocking layers, that the depth of your thinking and the nuance that you're able to bring to social perspective through storytelling, through memoir, is very rich. And I mean, I love that you are yay, I get to nerd, because I think you're one of the most exciting people I could think of to be getting nerdy about craft with. So I just wanted to say that. I was like, oh my God, the title is like a work of it's like a stroke of genius, and then we haven't even read the book yet, so there you are. Are you crying yet?
No,
I'm gonna make it happen.
I'm doing the monkey covering face emoji. I'm the living embodiment. So please talk about your book. So that
Right. Okay. Sure. Structurally, falling back in love with being human is very simple. It's a collection of 30 love letters, and I don't know. I've struggled a lot with structure and form in the past, and title has been very easy for me, usually. So I'll start with a title, and then I'm like, okay, there's a project that has to come after this title. It was the reverse with this book. I wrote it in 2021, and I really was unsure if there was another book in me at that point in time. I was in the situation that sometimes we get in. I don't know if either of you have had this, but my agents would gently email me every month and be like, so how's it going? And I'd be like, it's so wonderful. I'm gonna have a lot of chapters for you from the novel by next month. And then of course, I'd written nothing. It was 0 things. My poor agents. It just, wasn't working. And then several things happen at once, a number of life tragedies, including one where a very close trans woman friend of mine, disappeared, essentially. And also, around that time, a little-known writer named J.K. Rowling put out a public statement about her feelings on trans rights. And all of a sudden, I started writing these letters, and I actually didn't think it was going to be a book project at the time. I just knew that I knew that I had things to say to people who were beyond my grasp, right? Like friends who were no longer in the world, or authors who live in castles and are enacting oppressive ideology from on high, people beyond my reach. And so I started writing these letters, and I wanted them to be love letters because in some ways I don't think that there is any other kind of letter worth writing. And then the book emerged, and the structure has remained what it was, essentially from conception. I think the title was really difficult. I was calling it 30 Love Litanies, and my editor at Penguin Random House Canada, David Ross, was like, yeah, this is lovely, but also we're going to need a catchier title. So Falling Back in Love with Being Human is from the prologue, actually. I think it was David, actually, who was like, this would make a good title. And the rest, and the project kind of fell into place from there. Yeah.
It's so funny to me, it's kind of hilarious to me that you said, oh, the structure of the book is quite simple. Because when I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, the structure is so inventive. Yes, there are these love letters, which, by the way, also function as poems and offerings. They're not straightforward letters. They're these pieces of great beauty. They're interspersed as well with these kind of exercises. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you knew from the outset, exercises, but not in like a, you should go do this sort of way. They're just kind of invitations. Mm-hmm. Like write a letter to someone you have never been able to forgive and see what happens. So did you know from the outset that those invitations or exercises would be part of this, or did they come later?
I did know. And again, I mean, it's kind of because, like, I'm a weirdo, Like, I'm just, like, a little weirdo, and I'm like, what if I cut off a lock of my hair and put it on the windowsill and saw what happened? Like, will a bird take it away? I don't know. I mean, this is the witchy part, right? Like, I think so much about embodiment as a person who is kind of like a body-based healer and practitioner, and like what it means to bring the world of the symbolic into the world of the real, which I think is so much what queer and trans people do. Actually, we bring the world of the symbolic into the world of the real, and for this reason, I think we open up so much possibility and also terror for the people around us. Yeah. These rituals or invitations or exercises in the book are all rituals that I've done, like instinctively, to try to make a bridge between what was happening inside of me and what was happening outside of me. I knew that was what I wanted this book to offer to people, was a space where the reader can explore their own inner world in connection with mine and with the world around us.
That's so beautiful, and that's so aptly put. And I also just want to say, I mean, for those of you in the audience, I wish I could see you more clearly, but we're writers here together, right? And so I think that language that you used of bridging, that's so much of what writing is about, is how do you reach the reader? And that the word you used, embodiment, it's interesting because especially for me, being Asian, I can often be at a very conflicted, shall we say, relationship with my own body because I was really raised in an environment to exist between my ears and to be logical, and we pretend the body does not exist, and we ignore its needs, and we work and we push ourselves, and we are ambitious, and that was just my own, I mean, I don't speak for anyone, that was just very much how I was raised. And so that kind of witchy space that you open up serves as such a powerful antidote, at least it did for me, in terms of we don't have to exist purely in the space of logic and reason and how do we outthink everything. It was this kind of gentle way of moving into this different mode that I really appreciated and was powerful.
And also that the book in a way, constructs its own genre. That's one of the things that I'm most excited about it, that it's simultaneously, that it doesn't, like I think as somebody who has spent a lot of time in academia, right, like I'm overburdened by precedent, right? And one of the things that I so love about this book is how daring it is, and to be like, yeah, like it's like it's a memoir, but it also has, but it has prompts, it has instructions, it's epistolary, but it's not epistolary, directly, like directly invoking characters.
Right.
Like I feel like you make all of these decisions that are, that really speak to your goals, right? Like rather than allowing, whatever historical precedent is to take over and, and sort of co-opt what you want to get out of the book. And and honestly, like I really needed this, as a fellow trans femme, I really needed this book, like it's been a hard time, I think for so many of us, right? Okay, it's starting.
It's happening. Oh no.
And reading it just sort of gives me so much hope, right? And and this letter, right, like from the future to yourself, like the way that, of course, like I so identify with your experience, and so every trans person has a different story, it's true, and that is often said, but it also needs to be said that there are so many experiences that we have in common as a community, and that, and that we have to both, that we celebrate, but we also at times have to mourn, right? And have to bolster each other and support each other. And yeah, and I feel like your book has done that for me, and I will continue, like I read it for a second time this morning, and I will continue to reread it probably throughout my life.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh, this is like a deeply like Piscean moment for me. Just sobbing on the panel. Yeah, thanks for saying so. There's something really meaningful to me that the three of us are getting to have this conversation. I know we were wondering in our email exchange, like, is this like the first time at AWP that trans Asian, trans feminine writers have like had a panel? I don't know if it is or not, but I know it's not. Oh my God, that's amazing.
I meant to tell you both this. Yes, because I confess, I can be deeply skeptical, and that skepticism comes from having been in this industry. And I thought I was going to bet money that this was the first panel with two trans Asian women, probably the first panel with two trans women, perhaps the first panel with three Asian women, knowing how things can be, and it's not.
Oh my God, that makes me
And
so
that
happy.
made me so happy to not be the first, to not have you be the first.
Yes, it actually gives me a little bit of belief. Having been, like the first in a lot of contexts, and also, like experiencing the double edge of that, right?
Yes.
Like the way that it's so celebrated by a kind of like dominant narrative, right? I remember when I started I was the first trans women staff writer at BuzzFeed, like there was press, like there were articles, right? But it's such a double-edged sword, because it also means that like it took until 2015 for a 500-person news organization to have a trans staff writer.
I remember that moment. Well, I mean, something I was going back to as I was like dissolving there just now was, you and I were just talking about when did we meet, and I actually don't even remember the first message, although you might remember. I was like, maybe.
This is our 1.5 time meeting. We met on the street yesterday in real life.
Yes.
But we've been connected online for a number of years. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, I feel like I might have been aware of you first. I was like secretly doing a little bit of like online stalking, you know, back in 2015 or whatever, because you were doing all these pieces.
Just normal, right? Like just
Wow.
life.
You were doing all these pieces for The Guardian
Yes.
at the time, and I was like, oh my God, I wonder if I could ever be like a trans feminine writer in like any mainstream publication. And then you were the first staff writer for BuzzFeed, and we were connected on a few levels. I think you might have edited a couple pieces I did.
Yeah.
And there was like so much excitement for me in that time, right? Like it was like kind of like, you know what they were calling the trans tipping point at that moment. And trans racialized femininity had achieved like some kind of like cultural capital, like maybe for the first time. And there was so much of maybe for the first time, like, you know, always having to invent, always having to be like on the forefront, always having to represent, and always kind of like being in this place of being celebrated for being an edge pusher, but also like kind of on the edge of being like disappeared or, you know, like dropped at any moment. And I guess, you know, I think a lot about Morgan M. Page, like another like, trans woman writer who's very important, you know, to me, and I think to trans letters in general. And she talks a lot about like the danger of the first, like the danger of being the first, and also the danger of assuming that you're the first when actually maybe like these things move in cycles, and she invites us to remember like who we might be missing, right? And
Yeah.
I guess I just, you know, I think so much about Fairest as being a groundbreaking work, but I wonder if it feels that way to you. Like you are also writing, you know, in a tradition of memoir, in a tradition of trans memoir, and bringing a lot of like, not only invention, but like reinvention and honoring to that. And I guess a question I've always had for you is like, who do you see as like being like lineage influences in writing Fairest and in your work in general?
Oh, I mean, I feel like for me, I mean, there are the obvious influences, right? Like Janet Mock is certainly both, you know, like both in turn. I am very fortunate to be part of a kind of New York literary scene, right? So, you know, so Janet Mock has been deeply inspirational to me, not just as a writer, but also as a person. But I do think that for me, I was really invested in working on a memoir for trans people, you know, that positions the non-trans reader as an observer, because I felt like so many previous memoirs were framed around explaining what it is to be trans to cis people. And so and it was really such a pleasure, you know, like as Fairest was coming into publication, to realize that impulse was actually collective, you know, that there's so many memoirs that came out around the same time that takes that as a premise. Like so many of us noticed that, you know, the people from, I can think of Jacob Tobias Sissy.
Yes.
I can think of Cyrus Dunham's A Year Without a Name, but also subsequently, right? And I feel like for me, it's actually been less important to think about precedent and more important to think about literary community, to think about the fact that we're so encouraged to think about individual contribution, to think about individual innovation, when the fact of the matter is that our innovation as a community, the ways that we change the world as trans people and as trans writers, is infinitely more important than any individual contribution.
It's funny because one of my questions for both of you was going to be, Kai-Cheng, you have a particular line in your book that has stayed with me. My life is not your education.
Yes.
This line has haunted me because I confess that I often struggle in my work when I write about being the child of immigrants or having grown up with domestic violence and abuse, or thinking about the various messages that were passed on to me by my parents unconsciously. I have trouble not writing to a white audience or trying to create the space and permissiveness where I'm not seeking to inform or educate, and to write in kind of a different mode. And I was curious if you struggle with that, or if you have kind of writing practices that help you circumvent that or circumnavigate that?
Well, for me, I know the practice of like getting out or trying to like worm my way out of the paradigm of needing to pander or like needing to educate, needing to explain myself, started with my first novel, Fierce, Femmes, and Notorious Liars. And that novel, was like for me, like set the precedent for my writing practice. Like it just like allowed me to get away. I think because I was full of rage at the time. Like actually, you know, I was 25 when I wrote that novel, and at the time when I pitched it to the editor, I was like, "This is a novel about a gang of trans women that beats up straight guys for fun." And, oh, there's like fist pumping in there. And yeah, I mean, you know, if you read the book before us here today, right? Like, you know, I have different interests now, but I still really like this concept of a gang of trans women beats up straight guys for fun. And I remember even then my editors, who were lovely and also trans actually, like said to me, "Oh, you mean like guilty straight men, like straight men who have harmed trans women in some way?" And I was like, "No, randomly, randomly." And I didn't quite know why I was so insistent on it at the time. And then, I mean, of course, when I think about it now, I'm like, that's what happens to trans women, or that's what happens to the marginalized, is we get beat up at random. It's not if we are bad or good, it's at random. And I wanted so much to flip the perspective, like that perspective of like the deserving and who, like who gets to be centered in the story, like on its head. And although, you know, Falling Back in Love with Being Human is, you know, much more conciliatory in its approach to transphobia than Fierce, Femmes, and Notorious Liars, I knew that the love had to come from like a place of like ferocious dignity. And I mean, if just when I think about how you construct like identity and like the process of navigating being in the public, for example, from early childhood in Fairest, I see that too, like this reaching toward dignity that is like about like coming from the place of being a human as opposed to being like a metaphor or a symbol for other people. And I mean, if I was going to encapsulate the idea in like a sentence, I think it would be it. That would be it. It's like refusing to be a metaphor for someone else's experience. And like making instead like our experience of like the white dominant culture or the cisgender dominant culture or the straight dominant culture a metaphor for ours.
I think we all felt that in the room. That created seismic effects. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I found it particularly affecting the letter to the Johns, the Dear Johns letter, just because, you know, like first of all, surfacing sex work as work, you know, like thinking about it, especially like in relationship to a book, like I mean, I'm a freelancer, right? You know, thinking about like the ways that we navigate and find solace in moments of labor, right? And think about like what that means, and sort of and unpack the nuances of that, right? Was something that I found, you know, just really, really deeply moving. And I feel like thinking about audience, it really is like whenever you work on a book, right? Like you're in a particular, you know, you're in a particular multidimensional mindset, right? And just as, you know, I'm in the very early stages of working on another nonfiction manuscript.
Yes.
And which is also, you know, it's a direct address manuscript. I feel like it's such a rich mode, right? And, you know, like I'm so inspired by your book, so inspired by Cecilia's book, which is also epistolary, Dear Cinthurin, Aquicia Mezzi. It's just, you know, like we have, and I feel like what that does, what the epistolary mode does, is it allows you to be intimate with your reader, with the specific person that you're addressing or the specific entity that you're addressing, while at the same time not situating the reader as a sort of, I feel like for me, I wrote Fairest at a time when I was a trans journalist dealing with like hundreds and hundreds of transphobic comments and messages on my articles on a, on a super regular basis. And I feel like now I'm in a place where it's actually, I feel like it's okay for me to trust the reader. It's okay for me to think about the reader who's actually going to just get this, and it doesn't even matter if they're trans or not, that like if I approach the reader from a place of I will assume that, that you will understand me rather than, okay, like this is just for trans people and you can observe and it's fine, but like, like there's a wall here. It's been like a super, it's just been a super joyful place to write from, and has been like a really, really important part of my healing process, both as a person and as a writer. I mean, as somebody, I was very, like for people who've read my book, I am estranged from both of my parents, and I experienced a lot of abandonment and abuse as a kid, and it was really, it was just such the right time for me to read both of your books, and which are about caretaking, which are about community, which are about thinking of the whole, thinking of, like thinking not of the individual, but of others, right? And how enriching that is. And it's a mode that I'm really looking forward to exploring in my future work.
It's funny because one thing that came up for me in thinking about today and just reflecting about our, I was kind of in a mode of anticipating this conversation and reflecting on both of your works, and I was thinking about audience and that idea of trusting the reader and how to create a kind of permissive space in writing to bring in the reader. And it occurred to me, I wonder if sometimes when we write, particularly memoir, if the person we are writing to, I don't know if you ever experienced this, there's sometimes like a kind of flicker of you can feel someone on the other side of the page, right? A kind of spectral, ghostly presence, not in a cold way, but in a warm way. And I thought maybe that person is the younger version of ourselves who needed these words and who didn't have them at the time. And maybe we are bridging, to use your beautiful verb, bridging that space to that version of us who needed this written and said and articulated and documented and put out there. I did want to ask you both about how your books have perhaps affected different relationships in your life, and if, I don't know if having written these books, even among people who knew you or thought they knew you, if different conversations were made possible in surprising ways. In my case, my brother read a pre-pub version of my manuscript, and he called me, and I had shared it with him to say, like, oh, if you object to anything that I've said about you, I would want to know. I love you. I might not change what I put on the page, but I would still want to know. And he said to me, no, I trust you. I'm not here to like edit you, but I did want to say to you, we've never talked about our father. And he said, I always assumed that Dad was nice to you and that you were not abused, which is what I'd assumed of him. And it's astonishing how you can grow up and just assume certain things about family members. And my book gave us the chance to say, oh, we grew up with violence, which seems obvious, but we somehow we'd never talked about that. So I didn't know if there was a conversation or some kind of way that your relationships had changed as a result of you writing these works.
I was particularly curious about that for Fairest, Meredith, because you do go so deeply into the intimate with people. I'm weirdly fortunate that like all of the important people in my life just say, oh, it's your perspective, right? Like this is, even if I feel differently, I have offered, to let people read earlier versions of manuscripts, and like from
my dad to Rafe, who was my pre-transition ex, they've all just said, you know, like, I trust you in your perspective. And so it's sort of, and it leaves me in this position of, you know, just realizing, having written the book, that that I actually need to hold myself accountable, you know, just because I for whatever reason, you know, have ended up with just these amazing, you know, just sort of like people in my life who allow me to write whatever I want about them, right? Which I know is a very, you know, like is a really privileged position to be in. But I was in the Philippines recently for the first time since the pandemic. And the book is, you know, it has limited availability in the Philippines, and some of my family members are in really remote provinces, including one of my aunts, right? So one of my grandmother essentially adopted me as a kid, and my aunt and I, who is 4 years older than me, have always had this, you know, this sort of like loving but also somewhat tense relationship, just because of the fact that I sort of became the de facto youngest child when she was the baby before. And she had the opportunity to read the book for the first time over the holidays, and it was really an occasion for us to unpack all of those feelings and to just, you know, and to say, and it's really funny because, like, within a family, you think that everybody has all of the same information.
Right.
And you don't realize that they don't, you know? So she was just like, oh, like, I had no idea that you were in this dangerous, abusive situation, which is why my grandmother, you know, my grandmother, you know, like, took me away from my parents at the time. You know, like, I just thought she was, you know, you were her favorite, and et cetera, like, it gives, and so there's this way that, and I'm looking forward to having these conversations because, you know, like, a bunch of, you know, Filipino families are huge, right? So, so there are a bunch of people in my family who haven't read the book, who are going to be reading the book in the next few weeks, and I'm really looking forward to having those conversations and seeing, you know, like, the richness that will undoubtedly emerge from them. Yeah. What about you? Any good goss?
Any good goss? Well.
Any good goss that you can talk about at the AWP panel?
I'm blushing. I think that both of you have been much more rigorous in your, like, memoir ethics practices than I have been. And I'm like, uh-oh. I guess I should have been sending people manuscripts. I don't know. Yeah, well.
Well, part of what you're modeling is that one doesn't have to.
Right.
Which is important.
What a good save. Yes, reframe, yes.
Reframe. And it's true, because I think there's so many things that can hold us back in memoir from saying precisely what we most need to say, which is the scary stuff, the difficult stuff, the vulnerable stuff, the stuff that's most necessary for us to say. We can find all kinds of excuses and reasons to back away from. So yeah, what a beautiful permission granting.
Ah, yes. Thank you. Yes, I did it on purpose. You know, I can tell you about a conversation I didn't get to have, though, because I didn't send so, one of the love letters in the book is to all the boys I've loved before who didn't love me back. Yeah. But there's a specific boy who is mentioned in the letter. I think he's referenced as the closeted banker with a wife. with the wife who doesn't know about you.
Yeah.
And I mean, the banker is real. We'll call him John, and I fell in love with him in the first year of the pandemic, and we had, like, a very intense, strange love affair that, like, totally changed my life, maybe this actually illustrates the point that you're talking about. Like, you know, it was very intense. he also like approved me for like a mortgage that I would not normally have been approved for. So like it was very like financially beneficial to me. Like it changed my life in a very concrete way. And then he like abruptly vanished. You know, for reasons of his own, which I don't get into in the book. And you know, I had reached out to him a number of times just to try to connect, and he didn't, you know, he didn't want to. And I was left with this experience of like, I've been struck by lightning, by love, and I can't reach the person on the other side. So I wrote this love letter about it, and I thought maybe I could email this to John, you know, at his like banker email, but he doesn't want to hear from me. Like actually, like. That would be, I think, to have contacted him would have been more of a violation. And of course, I don't identify him in the book either. So, you know, in some ways, but I think a lot about if he heard that I had released this book, if he read the book, if he saw that reference to the banker with the wife who doesn't know about me, and, you know, what he's thinking about it. And yeah, sometimes I have fun, like, imagining like what he might say if he wrote me a love letter, like, you know, answering, which, you know, I don't think he ever will, because he's just like not that kind of guy. But yeah, there's something very particular about memoir, I think, and the people that we actually aren't able to talk to or don't get to connect with as we are creating the story.
I'm so glad I found it. I just feel like this would be a good moment to read a couple of lines. You talk about your own light, and you say, and the light of trans sisters, you say, maybe that's why boys like you come to girls like me in the first place. We keep the sun in our eyes and the moon in our chests, and you, I think maybe you're a moth attracted to all that light. Your words and promises crumble to dust as soon as you get too close.
Yes.
So John can take that.
Okay, but it also says, blessed be to the moths winging their way through the dark.
Yeah, no, you're so right. I was going mercenary, but you always end in a place of beauty, and you're over the mercenary part of it. So you absolutely have the blessed be the moths.
I have to say, because he's so... John out there is suffering, you know, like with his wife and his empty mansion, and I just want him to be okay. Anyway, I stop. That's the goss. That's the goss.
Such good goss. I love it. I love it.
You have a love affair with a British aristocrat, I believe.
Yes.
Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, you know, like yeah.
Did he read Fairest?
Did he read Fairest?
Well, okay, so I can't.
This is why you're here.
He most definitely read Fairest, and he most definitely, because I gave him an an advanced reader copy of Fairest. The thing that I can tell you is that we continue to be friends. We continue to be in touch. We continue to say hi. We continue to greet each other on our birthdays. But we, both coming from extreme passive communicator societies, have never talked about the book.
Oh my gosh.
And that the only way that I can actually envision talking to him about the book is to interview him for a podcast, which might actually happen.
And that will be the first time that you discuss this book.
I have a whole thing with, like, you know, as a journalist, like first encounters. Being on tape is like this is why, like, I was actually avoiding Kai Cheng during the conference because I was just like, I want to have the authenticity of this interaction.
Okay, I have a question about craft and the British aristocrat, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So something I noticed 2 or 3, however many years ago was that when I first read Fairest, was that, like, part of the genius of the title is that kind of the story is a fairy tale. Like, there is this, like, you know, you are a child who has been swept away by destiny, and there is, in fact, a literal like, Lord. Like,
I've led a very strange life. Yeah, like I did date somebody who at the time was an heir to a baronetry, who is now a baronet, whose like family home is at the bottom of Box Hill, where Emma was, Jane Austen's Emma was set. So, like we would walk through the British countryside, and I was completely obsessed with, like with British, well, I will continue to be obsessed with 19th century British literature, but I was particularly obsessed with it at the time. And yeah, and it is very, like I was just in the Philippines. I am so jet lagged. I'm 3 days away from being in Manila, and that feeling is very bizarre. It is like really, really strange how I end up in these situations where it's just sort of like, oh yeah, like that has happened. Especially when I'm around, my family, when I'm around, I come from a small rural village, right? And so, and a significant number of my family members have never left, have never spent a meaningful amount of time outside of that village. And so there is this sense of like, I don't know, like a kind of manifesting.
right.
That then sort of like becomes a reality, and there is kind of like there is kind of a surreal aspect to it.
Yes.
Well, and it's I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
Yeah,
Meredith, but it's worth noting here that you were a child actor
Yes.
and
yes.
Like a
and a
celebrity.
star.
Yes.
Child
Really, on a
celebrity.
sitcom.
Yes.
And that was super interesting in the context of part of what felt like it was happening in your memoir was this examination of performance
Right.
and roles and how easy it is to slip into what feels like a movie or a show, right? Like here I am on this gorgeous college campus in Boston, and it's
Yeah.
a movie set, like Dead Poets Society, or here I am with Sir, like with this
Yeah.
British aristocratic family in this kind of Downton Abbey-like setting. And what I really loved about your memoir was at the end, the way that you kind of repudiate performing, and you talk about the fact that you can see different paths for yourself,
Yes.
which I thought was really profound. Part of what I think exists as like, what I feel is a myth of trans life is that you figure something out about yourself and you transition, and it's like the key has been put in the lock and now everything is great, right? As if you solved some problem by figuring out this one thing. And I loved the complexity of saying, I could have stayed a gay man,
Yes.
and there possibly would have been happiness there. I could have stayed in the Philippines with my grandmother, and that possibly would have been a happy life. Like, what is a happy life anyway?
Yeah.
And to interrogate that meaningfully and honestly yields complexity. It's not as simple as one likes to think.
I mean, this is the thing that like haunts me. Like, I think you even have a line somewhere near the end, or maybe it's the last line of the memoir that's about like, which path would have been the fairest? No one can say, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I find so interesting about your life, and then the way you write about it, is that you resist the fairy tale. Like, you have lived the fairy tale that I think a lot of trans girls long for at some part of our lives. We like want to be swept away by destiny and then showered with fame and adoration, although it turned out maybe not so good. And then, and we want to be taken away by like a beautiful prince, and like to live this kind of very almost like trope-centered life.
Yeah.
Right? And even I think about someone like Janet Mock, who when she released her first memoir, actually did kind of structure her first memoir around the fairy tale, and like, she triumphs over adversity by being resilient, and then, gets the guy. And then of course her life has continued and she's not with that guy anymore. But at the time, I think there was this real feeling of like, to be a successful trans woman, you had to be beautiful, passable, famous, married to a cisgender man who was wealthy and, had pecs. And, and also maybe, had a lordship or whatever. But you have a very subversive take. And I mean, you have a subversive take on that in your life, I think, but also in your craft.
I'm sorry to tell you this, Kai Cheng, but I am married to a computer programmer who burnt out and became a massage therapist.
That sounds amazing.
So I have 24-hour computer repair and massage services.
Okay.
It's, you know, so I'm living a different type of fairy tale at the moment.
Honestly, that's much better.
But yeah, but I think for me, right, I think about this a lot because, you know, because I'm married to a person who allows me to, who doesn't get jealous when I write, you know, like very lovingly about my exes, who allows me to be myself, you know, like who doesn't make me feel like if I don't present in a particular way that I am no longer attractive or worthy, et cetera, right? That I have throughout my life, you know, throughout my post-transition life, dated people who were completely fine with me being a trans woman as fact, but they couldn't like see too much of it, you know, like they couldn't, you know, it's not, they, you know, like they wouldn't want to, you know, like engage with my pre-transition life. They wouldn't want to, you know, like see me being not that femme, right? And I feel like there's this freedom, you know, that I feel being, you know, in such a strong, intimate relationship with somebody who I can just be myself with. And that's really the fairy tale. It's not about the, I mean, don't get me wrong, calling myself Lady Wedgwood would have been nice.
I think you said that in the
but I vastly prefer, you know, like being able to just, you know, to be myself and be with a partner who fully gets that and understands it. And if he were here right now, he would be hiding under a, under a chair because he's extremely shy. But yeah, like I feel really fortunate.
How beautifully put. You know, we each contain multitudes, and I think both of your works and both of your lives are really about the idea of creating space for that multitudes. Okay, this might need to be our last question, sadly. But one thing that always fascinates me is the role that editors play. And I don't think there's enough discussion about it. And the unique ways that they can shape a book. Ideally, that would mean encouraging writers to take risks and to step even more bravely into certain spaces, emboldening us. But sometimes they come from a place of having a particular vision or set of fears or concerns. And I just, you know, especially because publishing has historically been so white and straight and cis and heteronormative and all of these things, I was just curious what the process was like for each of you working with editors, if there were moments of resistance and pushback or moments of collaborative wonder, of feeling really, you know, or both. But I would love for you to talk about that.
My editorial process was also kind of a fairy tale. You know, my editor is Elder Roeder, who I love dearly, and is Filipino, you know, so, which meant that we had, you know, like a really strong cultural understanding and basis for each other. And I remember the moment when she said, you know, Meredith, you don't have to italicize the Tagalog words, right? And me being like, oh crap, like I am, you know, like I'm creating unconscious explanatory commas, right, in my work that my editor is spotting and is actually encouraging me to you know, to rethink, right? And I think a lot of, you know, like when we talk about corporate publishing, you know, like we can be very cynical about it for good reasons, but one of the things that I think is really important to also think about is that, you know, within that corporate structure are actual people, are individuals who very much care about books, who very much care about the issues that we care about. And you know, so my process was extremely caring. You know, like Elda, I mean, the thing about Elda as an editor, I am not the type of editor Elda is. You know, like I'm a very opinionated editor. I'm very blunt. But Elda is always, you know, she phrases queries as queries. You know, she's very kind, she's very gentle, and she's made me not just a better writer, but as a better editor to other people, as somebody who edits myself. And and I was very lucky to have her as my editor. And I'm sure the fact that the fact that we're both Filipino played a big role. And also, one of the things that I told her was that we were talking about this in the about a few people. It's relatively normal for manuscripts to get turned in late, just because like you don't know how long a book is going to take. But I could not fathom the possibility of turning in my manuscript late just because my editor is Filipino, and so I had all of these like Filipino elder figures in my head, like my aunts, right, and my and just kind of like like elders in my community who would be very disappointed in me if I turned it in late. So I turned Fairest in on time.
I love that. And before we turn to you, Cheng, I also do want to say, I love that you mentioned the italicization.
Yeah.
And because I have found myself doing that as well when I have phrases in Marathi, which is my native language. And it's so easy to default into that othering of oneself. And it's like, why is that italics there? To me, it's not italicized.
Yeah.
Right? To me, it's a word. Yeah. And why should I slant it in that way?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I feel the same about Cantonese, and I also have like an automatic practice of italicizing. It was the convention when we were reading, I think, like in our formative years, and still in many places. But I mean, in terms of editing, I too have had kind of like a fairy tale experience. I have to say, like, for all of my editors, for all of my books have been like quite dreamy, and I got to work with like dreamy people, like my like hero Amber Dawn, like edited one of my first books, and then the editors for Falling Back in Love with Being Human are Katie Nishimoto of the Dial Press for the American version, and David Ross for Penguin Random House Canada for the Canadian version. And we all worked together as a team. And I mean, I think what stands out to me really from that experience is like how much they got the vision of the book. And they did encourage me to be bold with it. Like, I was nervous about the amount of sex work content that I included in Falling Back in Love with Being Human. I didn't actually think it was possible to write so frankly about a sex work experience, and particularly one that like this letter to the Johns that is like actually pro-sex work buying, like that is like pro-client. I didn't know that would be possible, and I never had an issue. Like, I think in many ways, I see Katie and David as like champions of the vision of the book, and I'm just really grateful, Yeah.
It's the letter to the Johns. To me, there was so much grace in that letter, and these men and their different circumstances, and it's funny how as human beings, I think we can sometimes anticipate the negative and come from a place of fear of, oh no, what are people gonna think? Or as opposed to the positive ripple effects, the positive ways that things can be received. So yeah, that was a favorite letter for me. I can't imagine the book without it.
Oh, me neither. Yeah, it's funny, I was recording the audiobook version, and both the producer and the director of the audiobook said the same thing. Like, they were like, well, we like this book, but our favorite really is this letter to the Johns. I've gotten so much feedback about that particular letter. Yeah, and I'm amazed that we're living in a time, actually, like this is maybe like a celebration moment where like trans women of color sex workers could write about that experience for Penguin Random House. Like, that's kind of amazing to me.
It's an amazing thing, and I think on some level it doesn't surprise me that there was no pushback on that letter, because it in no way felt gratuitous, it in no way felt exploitative, it in no way felt so necessary and so crucial, and also just the epitome of what the rest of the book itself was doing, right? Like, it was so in keeping with your broader message and space of compassion and empathy. And right, if the whole point is radical empathy, then how can we not think about the Johns?
Yeah, well.
Was there any fear? I hadn't thought about this beforehand, but yesterday I did a panel on the ethics and legal ramifications of memoir. Were people worried about the letter to J.K. Rowling?
I was worried about the letter to J.K. Rowling. Because, she has threatened to sue people before.
Yes.
But actually, I was worried, but I didn't hear anything from legal, and so hopefully we never will. I think also, it doesn't make a ton of claims that can't be backed up, right? Like the claims that letter makes about Joanne are like they're falsifiable, right? Like I quote her, and then it's just my opinion. But yeah, sometimes I'm still worried, but it would kind of be amazing to be sued by J.K. Rowling at the same time, Like, I'm not asking for that to happen, Joanne, okay, please? But, what? Pardon?
Put that in your bio, was sued by J.K.
We could put wants to be sued by J.K. Rowling in the bio, asking to be sued. No, we didn't hear anything from legal, so hopefully it'll be okay.
Well, that might be I feel like that's a nice place for us to perhaps end, because for whatever trepidations you might have on the writing side as you're all working on your books, to know that a letter to J.K. Rowling can exist and exist without pushback.
I love that it's Authors Guild related. If you do have problems, please consult.
I should slip you some money, Meredith. Thank you. Yes, if you ever do have problems, you can come to us.
Great plug. That was very well done.
That was so well done. Well, thank you, both of you. What an honor and a privilege it has been to share this space with you and have this time with you, and to get to talk with you about your beautiful books.
Thank you. It's been amazing. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm deeply honored. Thank you.
Let's give a hand to these two.